Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Holly Hedril, also known as the Oracle of Del Rey. I'm an astrologer as well as a mathematician. And making this video in order to describe the science of astrology. What it really is planetary cartography. Now, astrology includes interpretations and intuition and other aspects, but it is fueled and driven by a natal chart, and that natal chart is created using scientific and mathematical means. This video unpacks those means, how astrology functions from a math and science standpoint, and I talk about how it might have applications in astronomy today. Um, so let me get started with the presentation, sharing my screen. So, Astrology 201. I kind of do my video sort of like classes, is what I've set it up based on kind of like my college classes. I really want to teach, is something I want to do. Teaching astrology is also something I'm looking at doing right now. So it's kind of the setup of this video in order to explain the science and math that goes into generating the astrology charts, which are fundamentally mathematical. So this is an astrology chart. This all represents math, symbolic math. And it's really cool symbolic math. Um, Astrology is a symbolic mapping of actual planetary bodies and other celestial phenomenon relative to fixed points derived from the Earth's perspective. This mapping is scientific, using math and logic for the literal representation of 3D objects, interacting in 3D space on a 2D map or natal chart. However, interpretations or meaning derived from these placements is not scientific, but this is what astrology is most known for. However, the best astrologers like me understand that the science that goes into making natal charts, not just how to interpret what these placements mean. Um, there's a whole science that goes into it, and I think it's important for astrologers and practitioners to understand it. And this video is also great for people who want to know more about how astrology works. You hear stuff like on my next slide, like moon in the seventh house or something, and people just kind of arbitrarily associate that with meaning something to their personality or meaning something to their life or prediction or something. And that's the non-scientific part of astrology. But moon in the seventh house reflects a mathematical placement um, that results from uh, mathematical systems that reflect the solar system in the sky. So, um, this video is all about the sciencey part. It's about the interpretations part at all. So if you're looking for me about the interpretations, this is not that. This is all about the science that goes into creating the charts, science and math. So, and if I don't honestly know the a formal definition of science, let me look it up. It's through observation. So yeah. Um, but it uses math to stably um, replicate and represent physical phenomena in space, like where the planets are relative to Earth. So it combines lots of math and logic systems to produce a meaningful system that will always have a logical output that's always generating information on its own. So this is kind of like the mechanics of how that works. So, astrology has a rich vocabulary that often sounds arbitrary or difficult to understand. This is because these words refer to specific logical representations of symbolic measurements in math, not interpretations. So, they're known for their interpretations. Astrologers do the interpretation part, but these vocabularies are actually based in math, and that part should be better understood. Um, Phrases like sun trine north node and moon in the seventh house directly represent literal symbolic math placements. What they mean uses astrological interpretation. So my sun's trine the north node, and I'll show you what that means. I reference my chart throughout the presentation. Understanding the science behind the symbolic representations of planetary positions is the most important concept for comprehending astrology outright and leveraging it as a tool for yourself or clients. This grounds what the moon in the seventh house means to something symbolically and logically meaningful instead of arbitrary association. So arbitrary association is probably how most astrologers do it. I don't know. I don't know them. I know a few, and I'm not sure how versed they are in the math and science behind the creation of the charts. Um, but most astrologers this means something. So seventh house is ruled by Libra. And so moon in the seventh house means that your emotions are very Libra flavored, whatever they'll interpret that as. So that's what astrology is known for. But moon in the seventh house actually means like it's the moon is about to go over the horizon where the moon's about to go under the western horizon is what that refers to. So the moon is in the seventh house. It's near the western horizon. Because the beginning of the seventh house marks the western horizon. So it refers to a geometric placement of where the moon is in the sky. And the seventh house can be in any sign. And so sun trine north node is if you take the earth and the north node placement and you put the sun as the vertex of that angle makes a triangle, which is 120 degrees. But sun trine north node means something interpretive and kind of woo, according to most astrologers. And I'm an astrologer, and I interpret it to mean stuff that is like more on the woo side. I very much comprehend what this all means mathematically and scientifically, and that part also really fascinates me. So astrology is planet cartography. In traditional cartography, maps are defined by boundaries that mark differences between locations. These differences can be human constructs, such as nations or cities, or geographical, such as oceans, desert, or forest. Mountains would be a good one to add to that too. Space is vast and infinite from our perspective. Yet our solar system moves within defined but invisible boundaries contextualized by the stars. So creating a framework to map our solar system with undefined space mandates designating abstract locations by which to describe position or location. So, if you imagine this is the sun. So I kind of forgot to do Pluto's orbit. So if you imagine this is the sun, this is kind of how the solar system is laid out. If you're looking down at the solar system, it's like a bird's eye view of the solar system, right? In a rudimentary way. In the sky, with relative approximation to where these constellations are. So when we're on Earth, we don't know what the view is like from the sun, right? We can only see the view from Earth. So we're on Earth, we view this elliptical as we're traveling around the sun, but then we view it from our perspective. So these constellations if you just consider this a circle and divide it by 30 degrees, it makes 12 areas. So it's just 30-degree marks around a circle. But they are relatively close where these constellations are. But they don't change in tropical astrology. In sidereal, they do. In sidereal, this changes. In tropical, it doesn't. It stays the same. So you can much easier describe planets over time where they're at with tropical astrology rather than sidereal because you have to constantly make adjustments. Whereas this, you can predict where they're going to be in their orbit relative to the sun. Just these as fixed points in the sky that are evenly dispersed across 30 degrees. Sidereal also divides them unevenly between 14 constellations now. Was 13 for a while. Uh, so this is the sun, this is Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Earth. This is the moon around the Earth. Um, this is the north node and the south node. So the sun is the center, and my sun is in Scorpio. How does that work? Well, the Earth is in Taurus. So the Earth is considered directly opposite of the sun. My sun is in 29 degrees Scorpio, and my Earth then is in 29 degrees Taurus. However, the angles they're making when they're doing, because I was wondering, I'm like, do they do is the center, is the vertex the Earth or the sun? But it's the sun. Um, but when you're doing measurements for the Earth, you kind of like base it, or for the sun, you kind of base it off of the Earth. So because the Earth is in Taurus 29 compared to the sun is a Scorpio, that puts it in Scorpio 29 from the Earth's vantage point. But in terms of like planets making angles, um, Earth is the vertex to I'm sorry, the sun is the vertex to the two planets. Um, This is what the zodiac signs effectively do. They divide space or locations around the orbit of the sun into 12 distinct regions. All planets, including the Earth, are always within one of those regions while orbiting the sun. Planet cartography is also unique because it maps planetary bodies which are constantly in motion. So the planets are always in motion around the sun. The sun is relatively stable, and the planets revolve around the sun. Um, and then this stays stable as well. So as they revolve, they go into the different signs based on where they are. Kind of already described that. So elliptical projection, we see it from our vantage point, but we kind of project it to encompass how we describe how things orbit the sun rather than orbit the Earth, because things orbit the sun and not the Earth. But we don't have an Earth sign, we have a sun sign. So the zodiac elliptical represents the constellations that create the backdrop of the solar system's ecliptic, or the path that the planets travel around the sun. They are viewed from the perspective of Earth, but are abstracted in tropical astrology as encompassing the region behind the orbital path of the sun. This describes Earth within spherical proximity within the solar system, where the zodiac helps us locate the orbital plane, or the relative horizontal position in space where the planets are situated and travel within. So in space, the planets are all kind of suspended, like in the same like plane. And uh the zodiac elliptical is like relative to that plane. It describes where they are on that plane. So like we can kind of in this, if you can imagine it wrapping around that, these where these stars are located, or these constellations are located from our vantage point on that plane. So how astrology corresponds to astronomical planetary placements. An astrology chart looks complicated, but it just represents the orbital path of every planet compressed into one circular path. Each orbital path has a different circumference, so the distance between 0 degrees Aries and 1 degrees Aries is different for Mercury than Saturn, as well as they orbit at different speeds, so the time it takes to move from 0 to 1 degrees Aries varies between each planet. The difference in speed and orbital distance is symbolized as the time it takes for each planet to move from 1 degree to another. The Moon and Mercury move the fastest, and Pluto the slowest. So these symbols here represent the planets, and you see them just going along kind of like one circle that marks where they are. That one circle is like if you compress all of these, just like to the Mercury circle, if you just kind of brought them down to relative position of the Mercury circle, where they would show up. So because my sun's in Scorpio, it would be like if you just move that over, that's why it's over there. But so here's Mars kind of in the solar system perspective, and then here's Mars on my chart. And then there's Pluto, and then there's Mercury. So they're all right next to each other. So if you compress them all there, that's how they would line up. So um that's how the planets represent like where the planets are in the solar system. And here's Jupiter over by Aries. North node is this line. So the nodes are north node is like where either I forget it's either lunar or solar eclipse. So when a full moon occurs at the north node or south node or near them, an eclipse will occur. So one node is a lunar eclipse and the other node is a solar eclipse or something like that. Or depends on what phase of the moon it is that hits it. Um, I forget, but I know the nodes determine when an eclipse happens. Um, that's found on Earth and according to the moon's orbit, so it kind of goes around the zodiac a little bit differently. But it's still divided somehow 30 degrees. But my north node 0 degrees Aries, that like points to that. But that's what that is. That's the north node. And then Chiron, I was too lazy. I didn't research I forget what planet it orbits or where it's at, if it orbits a sun or if it orbits a planet, um, to put it on here. It would be somewhere here in Gemini, wherever it is. Um, and so how fast these planets go around the chart is determined by how big their orbital path is and how fast they move through it. Orbital fast, good thing too, yeah. Um, so next is the houses, or no, angles. My bad. Um, I don't know what to put there on. So this is looking at my Jupiter is trine my Venus. Angles are interpreted in the zodiac chart for various meaning. The sun forms the vertex of the angle, while the two planets define the rays extending from it. The line connecting the planets acts as a third side, analogous to the hypotenuse, opposite the sun's angle. On an astrological chart, just this hypotenuse line is shown, but the angle being described is the vertex created when those points meet the sun or the center of the chart. Only certain angles are seen as significant in astrology. When planets are forming these angles, they are considered aspecting each other. The main ones are conjunction, sextile, square, trine, and opposite. Planets are considered an aspect with each other when they fall within 10 degrees of forming one of those angles. The difference in distance from the precise degree is called the orb. For example, my Venus is trine Jupiter with an orb of 1.8 degrees. So it doesn't make a perfect 120-degree angle, it makes a 121.8 degree angle, or it makes a 118.2 degree angle. One of those two. And sorry, I just totally had a brain fog. Uh, so they don't always line up, but 10 degrees within 120 or 180 or whatever is considered, they'll be considered in trine or opposition. So 1.8 is pretty close trine. And they form these angles to each other all the time because they're constantly moving. So how fast they move is about how is determined by where they're at on their orbital path. And that's represented by where the signs are at. Because their orbital path is like arbitrary in space. So it's threw up the signs kind of like a wallpaper, like as a backdrop or something. Um, and so this is Venus, and then this is Jupiter. So you put the sun, the center angle, and that's a 120-degree angle. And so thus that is in trine. But this line is what's shown on the chart. So these are all hypotenuse for if you take these two planets and put the sun at the center. So I'm like, how does astrology not solve the three body problem somehow? If it kind of does, I'm claiming that one. Um, so I'm definitely claiming that one. Applications in the three body problem. I've been looking at though. I've ever been looking up the three body one, three body problem. I'm coming for it, Newton. Um, but so yeah, these lines all represent they connect between two planets or two. That's an asteroid. That's the ascendant. We'll get to that in a minute. Um, they connect to two, and then it's with the sun at the center. So the sun could be seen as here. Um, that will be a 120-degree angle. And it represents that. The angle displayed isn't, the angles displayed aren't the angles it represents, but it represents the hypotenuse of the angle. The hidden. But it's interesting. But the way the chart's laid out helps you figure out what these angles are. So it makes it more difficult to discern because these are triangles formed by three planets with Earth at the vertex. So this represents one angle, this represents another angle, this represents another angle. All with Earth, or I'm sorry, the sun at the center. So lots of layers of geometry. Tropical astrology is reliable astrology. There's a big difference between tropical and sidereal astrology, although they used to align. I practice tropical astrology and believe it is the more reliable system. Here's why. Sidereal astrology uses the actual locations and sizes of the constellations in order to determine the astrological wheel. On the surface, this seems more precise. In practice, this means that the boundaries of astrology are always changing, making it less predictable. There are now 14 signs or regions in sidereal astrology, which are all divided by zodiac constellation size. When constellations are added due to axial tilt or other perspective changes in space, the whole system must adjust. These changes also impact when signs occur during the year, so planetary measurements include constant calibration to adjust for real-time changes in cosmic perspective. If the goal is prediction, either in traditional interpretations or scientific, such as with orbital mechanics, then a close, consistent system of measurement is always more ideal. So these are fixed points in the sky. Constellations move because of axial tilt, but these remain fixed to where the constellations originally were when astrology was discovered. Fun fact. So, in tropical astrology, these may remain fixed wherever they are. And in sidereal astrology, they're always moving. And not only are they always moving, sometimes they're changing and adding new signs. So the circle's divided by 14 now. And instead of them being equal, each sign is based on the actual constellation size. So they're all different in sizes. So it's really, really tied to star placement. And that's always changing because of axial tilt. So it's just always shifting this. Whereas Earth astrology or tropical astrology, it keeps it based on Tropic of Cancer, Tropic of Capricorn. So if you were to imagine the sun in the Tropic of Capricorn, and that just shoots out way past its all the planets in orbit, and it would just mark around like where Capricorn is, but it would also mark 0 degrees Capricorn, and then opposite direction with Cancer. But they also represent the first day of summer, the first day of winter. But it's when the sun's making a 90-degree angle on the Earth in those respective areas. In the winter, in northern hemisphere winter, it's on the Earth is angled more towards the southern hemisphere, and on northern summer, it's angled more towards the northern hemisphere. So all the orbital paths around the sun. If you just mentioned big wallpaper surrounding all the planets in their orbital path around the sun, um, it's aligned with where this lines up every year. So it stays the same every year. It doesn't change. The backdrop doesn't change. First day of, or 0 degrees Cancer will always be. So I guess we can say that, like, looking at a chart, this is 0 degrees Cancer about right here. This is where the Earth is on its orbital path when on the first day of summer. If we align Cancer here, so we can kind of either kind of really ground yourself with perspective in order to like track moving planets. But Earth is here relative to its orbit around the sun on the first day of summer. Tropical astrology treats the solar system as a relatively fixed model, where the internal motions of the planets occur in stable repeating ways relative to the sun and Earth's orbit. Sidereal astrology measures those same motions relative to the background of moving stars, so its coordinates on the map are constantly changing. 0 degrees Cancer is in a different place in sidereal astrology compared to tropical, and it is also different from where it was 50 years ago in sidereal. Because tropical astrology is anchored in the repeating, predictable cycle of Earth's relation to the sun, rather than slowly shifting star constellation background, it remains stable over extensive timescales and does not require continuous adjustment. In other words, tropical astrology uses an independent system of measurement because once the key reference points, such as vernal equinox and solstices, are set, the system runs on its own internal logic and periodicity without being altered by external star drift corrections. So this just goes on to give predictable measurements over time. And where like if you were to look, 50 years ago, Cancer was 0 degrees Cancer was always here in tropical astrology. And in sidereal astrology, it shifted to somewhere over here over the last 50 years or something. I'm not sure how often it shifts, but I think over a lifespan you can see it change. Um, and so a chart on June 21st is something different entirely, entirely different sign, probably Gemini. So it has changed, it changes over the years. It's not reliable. Whereas with the fixed background, instead of like really making it precise to the science, it can get attenuated with lots of calibration and having to adjust for perspective and adding constellations and all that fun stuff. So houses. Astrology house basics. or the basic biatches. Houses are another aspect of astrology. Houses are shown in the chart on the left as the 12 designated areas besides the zodiac signs. So it's these 12 designated areas, little slices of pie. And then over here, it's just the kind of rudimentary circle. Where the zodiac sign represents a static background or map, that planet travels along in their orbit. The houses represent a changing background overlaid onto the zodiac static one. So, like planets, the houses are also fall into different and changing signs. Unlike the planets and similar to the signs themselves, houses designate 12 regions in the sky above the orbital plane that planets are considered to be occupying. Houses coincide with, but don't align to, the zodiac. This set of 12 regions is overlaid over the zodiac elliptical, but this map changes faster than the planets move, while the map of the zodiac region stays the same over the time. It takes about 2 hours for a house to change signs. So while these zodiac signs remain stable over time to the relative position, um, the houses, you can consider them in front of them or behind them. I just, because the way the chart was set up, I put them behind, but you could probably consider them in front of them because they're either way. But these are constantly moving, and these move with accordance to Earth's rotation on its axis. So the houses represent how Earth fits in to the perspective. So keep moving the little icon around. The houses represent the Earth itself divided into 12 longitudinal like areas. These represent how the Earth is aligned on its axis with respect to the zodiac elliptical. This is done using 4 measurements: the ascendant or rising sign, the descendant, the MC, which is the midheaven, or the IC, Ammonium coli. I don't know how to pronounce that one. So it's kind of easy to see like sunrise, sunset. But the first house is where sunrise would be happening. So it marks the horizon on the eastern horizon is the first house. So right here is the first house. This is the second house, third house, so on. This is the 12th house. So I was born in Michigan. The horizon would probably be there. So that's like where the first house would start. And that's like projected onto this map. So my first house starts in Cancer. And that's where the horizon was. And that represents my first house. And the horizon on the other side is the descendant, which is in Capricorn. So ascendant, they don't have descendant mark. This is the midheaven right here. So it's easier to see on this chart, but I have to move this thing. So these 4 points create the 12 houses because the houses aren't necessarily evenly dispersed. So the ascendant represents the eastern horizon, the descendant represents the western horizon from the birth city. The MC represents the point right above the person. So if you were to look up, that's the MC from the city center. And then if you look straight below, that's the IC. And so these points project out into the zodiac elliptical, into the signs. And that creates the houses. So my first house in ascendant is in Cancer. I have a lot going on in my 6th house. And then we'll do my 5th house, and then my lucky Jupiter and North Node in the 11th and 10th houses. So the point right above you. So if you imagine yourself on Earth to make the houses, imagine yourself on the sun to know where the planets are in the sky. Imagine yourself on Earth to understand where the houses are, what the houses mean when it comes to the center. So when you're talking about these angles and where these planets are, the sun is the center. When you're talking about sun sign, Earth is the center. And when you're talking about the houses, the Earth is the center. Otherwise, the sun is the center. So if you consider Earth the center when it comes to designating the houses, eastern horizon, western horizon, point right above the head, point right below the head. And so because of, I'm born in the fall, so the Earth is tilted in a certain way. Um, it's different. And so location changes the house situation, but so does time. So being, in Livonia, Michigan, it's not always going to be the first house in Cancer at 6 degrees. That changes about every 2 hours. So that would move. These would stay aligned unless there was like a shift in that time to these degrees. They stay relatively static. These don't move very fast. But this moves the fastest. This moves about every 2 hours in terms of houses, how the houses are divided. Each planet moves differently depending on how fast it moves around the sun and how long that takes. The moon moves the fastest. It goes around in about 20 something days. When the sun and moon are right next to each other, like they are, I think it goes through a single sign every 2.5 days. But when they're right next to each other, it's a new moon. And then when the moon is on the opposite side of the chart, it's a full moon. So if it was a new moon that day when the moon was at 29 degrees Scorpio. And that's like 9 degrees. See, I think it was within like 12 degrees in a day. So it was a new moon that day. Um, this is Neptune, which moves a lot slower, and it's over, so it goes a lot slower. But so the houses will change every 2 hours for a location. And then where the eastern horizon and western horizon are will also change. So these will change every 2 hours and via time, and then they'll also change via location where the horizon is. Will change depending on where you're at. So, so this is what you would see on astro.com, which is a good website. I recommend it. This is just, it lists the sigils what the planets are represented by and then where they're at. So 30 degrees for each sign, and it's like how a normal circle is measured. So it's degrees, minutes, and seconds. They're all placed within 0 to 29 degrees of any sign. And that corresponds to where they're at in the sign corresponds to where they're at in space compared to everything else, but mostly compared to the sun. Based on points set by the sun's solstices and equinoxes here on Earth. This box here just represents the 12 signs and then what planets are in it symbolically. So it represents it by its 4 elements, which is fire, earth, air, water, and the 3 modalities, which is cardinal, fixed, mutable. So mutable fixed is Sagittarius. Fixed fire is Leo. And cardinal fire is Aries. This box represents. So these are just the degrees. So this is 0 degrees Aries, 29.59. So this can be 0 through 29. This can be 0 through 60. I think these can both be 60. go up to 60 minutes and seconds. Because you have to like with measurement, you can go into infinity with precision to cut it off somewhere, to be able to do stuff with it. Um, so this is where what degree of it is. It's just a degree is just a distance measured in angle because it's so far away. So my sun's at 29 Scorpio, 9 minutes, 22 seconds. So almost in Sagittarius. Down here reveals what these lines are. So trine represents a 120-degree angle, or the triangle is the symbol that represents it. So here's the planets in a stacked in a cool way. So every square is two planets intersecting. So every square is can represent the sun here. So my Jupiter and Venus, for example, are making a 120-degree angle. They're in trine. So this triangle symbol here means that Jupiter and Venus are making a 120-degree angle with the sun at the vertex. And my Mars and Jupiter are opposite, so it's that red line, they're opposite each other. So this just designates significant angles going on in the charts and what degrees those angles are. Opposites and trines and conjunctions and sextiles are the ones that are marked. You'll notice on my other chart, they do angles with the North Node and Chiron and the ascendant. But my chart looks a lot more bare on Astro because they don't track as much. They don't do these 3 points. Actually, they do. They do the ascendant and they do the midhaven. They don't do it in terms of lines here, but they do it in terms of my ascendant is trine Pluto. Where's Pluto? There's Pluto. Got a 120-degree angle right there. Square is 90-degree angle. Square. Yep, about a 90-degree angle there. So those symbols represent the angles. So yeah, that's a basic overview of how this math and science works to do cartography of the planets. Astrological interpretations themselves are not science. I hope that's obvious. But this is kind of like how the planets are mapped onto a 2D plane in a coherent way that describes their actual placements in the solar system. But this all represents math. And people like they'll interpret all this stuff, Chiron in the 12th house or Chiron in Gemini and all this stuff and not know what it means functionally in terms of math and what it's doing. So I hope to mitigate that with this video, help teach people how to understand the functionality between how it works. I think it's really cool. I don't like how astrology is rejected in modern science. I think it's dismissed too much because of the interpretive aspect of it. I think mathematically it could probably help solve the three-body problem. Like I said, I claim that if it does. But I think can be of use in some ways in terms of like orbital science and trying to land craft and do different kinds of space travel. And I think if they're not using astrology already, why wouldn't they? Because even if it's not completely calibrated correctly, it's a system that could be. theoretically. So if it's not already calibrated correctly, it definitely could be in a way that's like useful in terms of astronomy and putting different crafts on further planets. And so I think it's dismissed too much. But I think it can have interpretive value. It can demarcate seasons and different patterns, and there's a lot to be discovered in terms of existence and reality and how we understand it and the things that can help define it. So I think astrology is very underestimated. I do readings and I take donations. Payments and donations are done at hashtag CoffeeCrow420. 30-minute video is $35 and a 60-minute video is $50. These include a personalized little presentation, something like this, as well as a PDF interpretation. Is about 30 pages of your tropical astrology chart interpreted through the I Ching, ancient Chinese book of changes. So I'm an astrologer who understands the underlying math and science. I know the difference between interpretation and tradition and interpreting to have meaning for affairs on Earth and the science that goes into it. And I think uniting both could be a cool thing. Who knows with prediction and, AI, how it could be leveraged to like pick up trends and see if there's any kind of validity to astrology. I think there is. And if there is, it should be able to be identified. But might not have been identifiable before. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll consider donating, liking, subscribing, or booking a reading with me. So I have to figure out, there we go. There we go. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it to the end through all of my ramblings. I hope this was valuable and it taught you something about astrology and how it works, so you can use it as a tool to help yourself to better understand it or to give readings to others. Once again, my name is Holly Hedril, the Oracle of Del Rey, and I appreciate you tuning in. Thank you.